This is Dr. Richard Shuster, host of the Daily Helping Podcast and CEO of Your Success Insights. Catch me on the Jesse T Show.
Dr. Richard, what is going on, brother?
Oh man, I am so excited to be here today. And we had such a cool time on my show yesterday. I am so excited that we get to now flip the script. And now here we are with your peeps on your platform, and just excited to have an awesome chat and hopefully help a lot of people listening to this today.
I'm excited, man. I believe, was it Eric Cabral that put us together?
I think so. I was trying to figure out who that was yesterday, but
I think it was
so.
Eric. Eric's an amazing human being.
Yeah.
And, I like doing life with good people that are curious in their own disciplines, that are creating change in the world. And when we connected, you were absolutely cut from that cloth. You are cut from that cloth. And we found out there was a lot of resonance from growing up liking a lot of the same stuff, comic books, superheroes, movies. We talked about Karate Kid before jumping on this podcast today, and where that's been and how cool that is. And, we live in the same town, which is like, a good 30 minutes away from each other. So we're close enough to where we could do some hangs, which will be really cool. But as far as today goes, man, I want to shine a light on you, your story, your journey, things you're working on, things you've experienced, things you may have overcome, and give a little bit more context to who you are. If you could just share a little bit about your journey with us, who you are, what you do.
Well, I think you'll enjoy this as a comic book guy. So I think I'm on version 3 of who I am right now in terms of major system upgrades.
Yep.
The original version of me, you would not have wanted me on your show. I was quite an impetuous dick. And I was such an obnoxious, arrogant kid. I was, in my mind, destined to be the next Tony Stark. I started a technology company when I was very young, like 23, 24. And I was kind of drunk, and I bid on a contract with the Department of Defense with 2 guys that I had worked with previously. We put the bid in, and we won it. I had no right winning this thing. And nor did I have any idea how we would execute what we promised that we would do. And this wasn't, unlike Tony, this wasn't making weapons. Like, this was securing the medical records for the entire army and creating the pipe. This was a long time ago. So this was new kind of stuff. And it went to my head so quickly. And all of a sudden, my world was filled with the glory of the Shuster empire. That's what this was, right? I was building my empire. I would get home after I worked, and I would get on eBay, because you can buy anything on eBay. And I would look up islands, private islands that I was going to buy and name after myself. I was going to have Schusterland, and it was going to be a real thing. And the private jet with my face on the tail, and like that's really like who I was. And I didn't want a family. I never wanted to get married. Like, I just wanted to party, and I wanted to live the life, and the Tony Stark, the Bruce Wayne kind of a lifestyle, right?
Bachelor, playboy.
That's right.
Billionaire.
And that's what was going to happen. I'm sure of that. Until one day, I was in a really horrific car accident. So here in Atlanta, and so we're gonna keep using sci-fi movies throughout our talk today, Jesse. If you think about The Matrix, right? Like when Neo was first dodging the first one was the best, of course. And so when Neo is dodging those bullets, or in slow motion, there's a phenomenon. I understand this now as a clinical psychologist. There's a phenomenon known as tachypsychia. And this is essentially the brain saying, time out, like, let's take stock of what's going on in our situation. That gives us time to assess the situation and do something about it. We have documented soldiers have shown this for years, like the grenades coming. So this car accident, when this kid goes through the intersection, slams into me, which sends me into oncoming traffic. And ultimately it was me crashing into a telephone pole. That's what stopped my momentum.
Wow.
That was maybe 3 seconds, Jesse, maybe. But in that span, because of that tachypsychia phenomenon, everything I'm experiencing in slow motion.
Yep.
Like, I'm seeing my windshield shatter It was like 5 o'clock, right? So the sun was just like bouncing off the windshield. Like I'm seeing little bits of glass glowing as they're kind of floating in the air. And I look down and my center console is just crushing into my ribs. And I can feel it happening, but I don't feel any pain. It was the most fascinating sensation as I reflect upon that. But what was really significant about that is I had this conversation with myself and I said, I'm about to die. And it wasn't one of these moments where I, tried to make a deal with the devil or God saying, if you let me live, I'll do X, right? No, I was dead. I was going to die. And I started thinking about my family who was going to get a call on a Saturday night that their son was dead. I was thinking about my brother. I was so focused on all this stuff, right? And there's nothing wrong with stuff, but I was focused on the acquisition of things for the sake of having things.
Yes.
And attaching my self-worth to having things. And I realized that the car I was driving was not coming with me. The watch I was wearing was not coming with me. And I felt an unbelievable amount of guilt and despair in that moment. And so, spoiler alert, right? I didn't die from that, but I did break my back. So, like, the car was my bane, right? And so, I told you I was going to keep bringing in these comic book references, right?
Yes.
And so, my back is broken. I'm in the hospital, and I'm told all these things I'm never going to do again, right? And though I didn't understand energy healing and some of the things, and I'm saying this as a Western trained clinical psychologist, I'm a neuro guy, like I'm a scientist, but that started my journey. And I very much looked the doctor in the eye, which, and I'm sure I said this incredibly obnoxiously, like, no, like I basically told him, I don't like to be told what to do. I don't like to be told I can't do something. I'm going to do all these things that you tell me that I can't do. And I do. I'm not in a wheelchair. I can do anything physically, thankfully. And but I had an incredibly long road to recovery.
How long?
Give me 7 months, probably.
Okay. 7 months. And what was the day-to-day in terms of mobility and protocol?
A lot of physical rehabilitation. A lot of pain management type treatments, and a lot of depression. And
pain management medicine as well.
Yeah, I didn't take narcotics. I refused to take narcotics. So, but many months into this, Jesse, I still had very limited mobility. One of the things that was really interesting was driving. And so I lacked the ability to reach back and grab a seatbelt. Couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting, because I was at a point of desperation where if you had said to me, hey, Dr. Richard, if you would eat a bag of glass, this is going to heal it, I would have done it. Like, I was so desperate. I was in so much pain.
Yep.
And so this one doctor referred me to his colleague, and he said, you should see he's an old friend. He's very interesting. I think you'll like him. And that's all he said. I said, all right. And so I went to go see this guy, and he was a Western trained physician, licensed, took the boards. He's a doctor, right? So I can wrap my mind around that. But he had stopped practicing and went to China for many years and studied acupuncture.
I'm so excited about this conversation.
And so this guy, and it was interesting because insurance was paying for all of this. And so he was able to use CPT codes, what doctors use to bill insurance. And there was obviously no code for acupuncture. I don't know what he billed it as. And in hindsight, it was probably insurance fraud. Now that I'm thinking about it,
good for him.
Years later, good for him, right? No, but he started doing the acupuncture, and he had this table. It was very much like a massage table, except there was a contraption at the base of these mirrors. There was a system of mirrors. So you, as the patient, could look down in this hole where your head goes and actually see him sticking the needles in your back.
Wow.
And so he says, well, where is the fracture? So it was T5, and he's putting the needles all around my spine. And as he does this, it becomes red, like maybe the diameter of like a silver dollar.
Okay.
And so pretty red. And
in the spots of the needles?
No, like in the spot of my fracture.
Understood.
Like it was like the needles were around the perimeter of where it was red. And
Got it.
Believe that it was the needles that made it red, right?
Yep.
And so he hooks up these little alligator clips, with hooks him up to a battery of electricity and says, "Just relax." And boom, he hits the battery, and it's so peaceful. And I fell asleep. And when I woke up, maybe an hour later, he says, "Okay, we've made great progress." As we have. And he says, "We'll take a look." And so that silver dollar size red disc had reduced in size to maybe a quarter. And then I went back and I went back. And then it was like the size of a dime and the size of a pea. And within a matter of weeks,
Yep.
I'm grabbing that seatbelt and I'm feeling kind of pain free physically for the first time in a long time, and that opened my mind to the idea that there are things that we don't understand, that maybe there's different perspectives that are worth listening to and considering. So while my body was well on its way to healing, my mind was not. I went back to work and I resumed my position. And each day that I stayed in this job working, I became increasingly miserable.
Yep.
Everything was like a shade of gray. And to the effect that it was physically affecting me, like I was getting sick. And one day I walked in and I told my partners, and, these guys, I'm not going to say anything bad about my partners, my ex-partners. They weren't bad guys. They were just bad guys for me, meaning that we weren't meant to be together.
Yes. Just not a good fit.
And not a good fit. Right. Yeah. And so I told them I was out. I walked away and I went from like a gazillion hours a week to none.
Good.
I had cash. So I didn't need to run out and find the next thing right away. But what was very interesting is that I'm in this place emotionally, probably the worst I've ever been in my life.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I'm using clinical eyes, to revisit this, but I was absolutely clinically depressed. I was not suicidal. I never got to that point. I don't think I got close to that point, but I felt worthless.
Okay.
There was a sense of foreboding fear because I didn't know what was going to come next. I just knew that what I was doing was destroying me.
Yep.
Emotionally, and I had to walk away. And it's really funny. The universe is cool, Jesse. And I like to tell people, if Instacart had existed back then, I don't know what I'd be doing today. Because the moment that shifted everything and created version 2 of me, that I like to say, is I went to the grocery store because I had to eat. That was the only reason I left home, was to go get food. Otherwise, I stayed in the house. I, kind of wasted time on the internet and wallowed in self-pity.
Mm-hmm.
And at the grocery store, I overheard 2 women. I happened to be in the right aisle at the right time. And these women were freaked out about their teenage daughters on social media. And, I had all this, knowledge that I felt was useless. I wasted all this time in computers and useless. So I said to them, hey, I have a background in network security, and I can tell you some of the things you need to do to keep your kids safe online. And I didn't mean to terrify them. I wanted to help them, but their eyes got like massively large, like they saw a ghost. And they said, I'm the president of the PTA and you have to come speak at our school and other parents need to hear this. So I said, okay. And it was cool because I didn't have an agenda, right? I wasn't trying to sell anybody anything. I was just there and trying to help people. So I made a PowerPoint presentation, which is something I hadn't had to do in a while. And I get up on their little podium. I don't know, there were maybe 40, 50 parents in the room, and I spoke. And at the end of it, a lot of people were coming up to me and thanking me how helpful I was. In particular, there was a guy who was in law enforcement in that city, and he worked for the cybercrime division of the city. And he's like, hey, you're really good at what you do, and you as a civilian can say things that we in law enforcement can. Would you be willing to come speak with us at these different locations? And all of a sudden it was like kindling, right? Like I felt good. And I was like, okay, so helping others feels good, right? That was like the first ding, 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 right? And so I started doing that. I mentored kids. I got a social work degree. I thought I was going to be a therapist at the time. So I got a master's in social work where I was working with kids who had been displaced from Hurricane Katrina. I saw so many things that made me so grateful for the things that I had. And then I continued to pursue degrees that I never thought I would, and I went and got my doctorate. So I have, as I mentioned, I have a doctorate in clinical psychology with specialized training in forensic and neuropsychology. And so I had made it, Jesse. I did it. I graduated and I passed my boards, and I'm like, I'm a real doctor in the real world practicing. And I thought that was all I ever wanted to do. Right.
What year range? What time of it? Like, was it early 2000s? Where was this?
Yeah. So by the time I graduated, it was 2013. So like from the accident to going back and getting my first master's to completing the doctorate was a span of about 10 years.
Yep.
And so I was so happy. I'm out in the world and I'm practicing. And I mentioned this to you yesterday. The majority of the work that I did was with foster care children who had been physically or sexually abused. Heavy work, and made me very grateful to come home and hug my children who were very, very young at the time.
So powerful.
But then there's that little voice again, right? And I'm sitting there like, I should be happy. I should be so fulfilled because this is what I wanted to do. This is the path that I was set down or set on. But this little voice was telling me, do more, be more, help more, right? And so I don't know what made me decide to do it one day, but I just declared I'm going to start a podcast, right? And so I had Googled how to start a podcast, and I went on Amazon and I bought a microphone that they say people should buy, right? CNET liked it, and I bought these cans, and I started getting up every morning and sending emails to really famous people if I could find their email addresses, and inviting them onto my show. And not a single person responded to me for a very long time. But I kept at it, right? Because, and it was so funny. Like, I think about this now. Like, I didn't even have a show title. I didn't have any. I had a Hotmail address. That's what I was emailing people, right? Who's this guy with Hotmail? And so, but eventually, people started responding. And then the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy. And then one day, not long after I launched, maybe several months after, somehow a journalist from NBC found the show.
Wow.
And reached out to me, and they wanted to do a series of articles at NBC.com Health about the brain, right? Would you be able to help us with that? I said yes. And they had the foresight to have them link to my podcast in those articles. And overnight, Jesse, this show went from people who were listening to me that were just like basically friends and family, like nobody listened to my show. To all of a sudden, I had an audience in 150 countries. And people whose books were on my shelves that I put on a pedestal were contacting me to come on my show. And so externally, I'm saying, well, Jack Canfield, what makes you want to come on the Daily Helping? Inside, I'm saying, why the hell does Jack Canfield want to come on my show? Who am I? And so I had a bit of that imposter syndrome. And these people were calling me influencers. And I Googled that too and looked up what that word meant. And what I said to myself was, okay, if I'm an influencer, then I have a responsibility to leverage my platform to help as many people as I can. And the way that I decided to do that, as things come full circle, was to create another technology company. Although this one was going to be focused not on military type stuff, but I, as a psychologist, have always disliked the assessment industry. I find that industry is so greedy, and they are designed to find out things wrong with people, and that's it, right? And so I felt that industry needed a shakeup, and another declaration. I told my wife, I said, I'm going to be the Michael Dell of the assessment industry. And so I created a company several years ago called Your Success Insights with a colleague who went to graduate school with me. And we create predictive algorithms that help improve people's lives and not only find the areas where they need to improve, but things that make them rock stars as well. So we have tools in the trauma space for first responders, for
Yep.
veterans. I've got the only system in the world that addresses the impact of racial discrimination on addiction, which I'm very proud of. We have tools for athletes and peak performance, and we have tools in the corporate space on employee wellness. And so I'm living the dream. I'm doing the podcast. I did my first TED talk. Like I am just like on cloud nine and I'm rocking and I'm just like, I'm so fulfilled. And then something happens again. So now here's version 3 of me is in June of 2020, I suffered a stroke and I almost died. Now this is like peak COVID, right?
Yeah.
So this is the time when we're still Lysoling our groceries and our kids because we didn't know any better.
Right.
And so I have the stroke at 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah. Can you walk through the details of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It had been a killer day. I finished up my last call with this group out in Phoenix, I believe. So like it was a late call for me. So like I walked upstairs at 11:30, but we were going to do some business together. I was fired up and I go to bed. And 2 hours later, I feel this, I'm startled and I wake up from sleep and I feel this very strange sensation in my mouth. My tongue felt strange. And I turn and I look at my wife and I instinctively, like I rip the pillow out from under her head. Now she's a nice Southern girl who does not like to be woken from her sleep. So but looks at me and what I should have said was, somebody please help. I need help. Like something's wrong. The words that came out of my mouth at the time were, I'm sorry.
Oh, wow.
And she muttered something probably profane and went back to bed. And I went back to bed. So there's a couple things that actually saved my life, and this is the first one. So we had bought my son for his 5th birthday a puppy because our trip to Disney World that we had planned for him was canceled because of COVID. They shut the parks down. So we took the money and bought him a dog. So that dog, we were crate training him poorly, unsuccessfully, but we were taking shifts, like just like you have feedings with a baby. So the dog started barking at maybe 5:30, 5 in the morning, something like that, 5:30. And so it was my shift. So I get up. So mind you, my brain had been bleeding for about 3 hours. And I get up and I won't say that I'm having a hard time walking, but I'm a little unsteady. So I was a bit allergic that day. So I'd taken some Benadryl like right before I went to bed. So I'm in my mind thinking, oh yeah, Benadryl can do that because it can.
Yeah.
And particularly if you take it late and you wake up early, like you could still be kind of drowsy. So Benadryl, right? So I go downstairs and the dog had like shit all over the cage, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's lovely, right?
Just so, side note, I'm staring at a beautiful 1-year-old Siberian Husky that A is the most stubborn breed of dog, pretty much. B has intense energy, and C was really hard to crate train as well. And so I feel your pain. I know the catastrophes. I know
and I understand that very well. I grew up with a Siberian Husky as well, so
they're amazing. But they are. It's my mom said when I was a kid, she somewhat tried to like tongue in cheek curse me. She said something about girls and like, I forget what she said about girls, but basically like that was going to be like something that would be a curse of mine. And I think she missed that. And Paco was like the second coming of me giving her all the shit I gave her. His name is Paco. I gave her so much shit growing up as a kid. He's the one giving me all the shit back. It's my karmic reality is what's happening right now.
There you are. Well, my dog Crusher, who had crapped himself, that created a situation where it's a 2-person job, right? And so I kind of stumbled my way back up the stairs and I go wake up my wife. And as soon as I tell her what's going on, she shoots up immediately with horror in her eyes and said, "You're slurring your words."
Wow.
And so I think about that. And once more I go, yeah, I did take 2 Benadryl last night. Like, it's still like, it's impossible, right? That this could have happened to me. I'm still not there. So we go downstairs. She opens the cage. We get the dog to the front of the house, get him on the leash. And because it's pitch black, I need my phone, right? Because you can't see anything. And I have no idea how to use my phone. No idea. And then it hits me. It's like that moment in The Sixth Sense, right? Where they read all the clues where they're all like, oh my God, like unsteady, slurring my words. I don't know how to use a phone. Holy shit, I've had a stroke. And then it hits me that not only have I had a stroke, I had a stroke 3 hours ago.
Yes.
And if I don't do something really quickly, I could be in serious trouble if I'm going to live at all. And so we throw the kids in the car. They don't know what's going on. They're, why are you going to the hospital, Daddy? I said, well, Daddy has a headache, which, as Obi-Wan said, was true from a certain point of view. And we get to the hospital. Of course, my wife can't come with me, right? Because it's COVID.
It's the worst time to have to go to the hospital.
And so there's this big makeshift plastic tent with a woman literally in a hazmat suit. Standing there.
Something out of a sci-fi movie like Contagion or something.
It's
like
crazy.
That.
Yeah, it was very much like that. And she said to me, why do you need to be admitted to this hospital today?
Huh.
I said, I've had a stroke. How do you know? I'm unsteady. I am having cognitive, and I'm using neurological type terms, right? So she says, okay. So they take me into the pre-admission section. So they had to make sure I didn't have COVID. So they shoved the thing up my nose, and they, I didn't have COVID. So I'm still bleeding, right? Like, they haven't seen me yet. An hour goes by, and they do a CT scan. And the doctor, and I tell him, I said, he says, what makes you think you have a stroke? I said, this, I could tell him the symptoms. He looks at the CT scan results and he says, you didn't have a stroke. I'm discharging you.
Whoa.
And I stopped and I looked him in the eye. This was like a, classic Clint Eastwood scene kind of, right? All they needed was the tumbleweed. And I said, I'm not a layperson. I'm a doctor too. I trained at the Cleveland Clinic, and I've seen more stroke patients than you or anybody else in this room. I said, you're going to give me an MRI. Then you're going to give me blood thinners, which I need to save my life. And you're going to do those things now. And I stared at him. I didn't talk. I just stared at him because I remembered the very first lesson my first sales manager ever taught me in my first job out of college was when you make the ultimatum, whoever talks first gives in.
Yeah, old school sales techniques.
That's right, right? Very uncomfortable. But he rolls his eyes and he gave me my MRI. The stroke, as it happened, was less than a millimeter. So I know a lot of you are watching this on YouTube and some in the car. I can't even show you how small
the space between your
the
fingers,
delta was. Yeah. I missed a major center of my brain called the basal ganglia by less than a fingernail clipping's length. Had I hit it, I probably wouldn't be here right now.
Wow.
And because it took so long to get me everything I needed, by the time they did get me the blood thinners, my fine motor skills, so my ability to use my fingers was so shot. It took me over an hour to send the text to my wife, strokes confirmed, they are admitting me. Wow. I couldn't use the voice assistant on my phone. And I did, by the way, remember, I was like, oh yeah, my thumbprint can get me in the phone. I didn't remember that then, but I figured it out. But I couldn't use the voice assistant. My voice was gone. And they admit me. And, I'm terrified because number one, like, this is now, I've had my close call already, and here's another. I mean, I think about Luke Perry. Like, I kept thinking about Luke Perry in the hospital. Luke Perry didn't die from the stroke. Luke Perry died from the consequences of the stroke. Strokes are like earthquakes, right? Like, the first one happens, but then there's these aftershocks. And so that night, I was too scared to go to sleep. I found this picture about a month before we had hired a photographer. So we had professional pictures. And there was this really cute picture of my wife, my kids, and they're holding the puppy. Who's now 70 pounds. And I just stared at that picture all night long. I'm clutching the phone. Like, my hand hurt. I was clutching the phone, just telling myself over and over, stay alive, like all night long.
Wow.
I didn't know. And so, the morning came, and the way that I'm built is, when I have something like this happen to me, um, I get knocked down, right? But then it's time to cue the Rocky Four montage score and get
That's
better.
my favorite Rocky.
Mine too. Mine too. Oh yeah, it's by far the best. And the soundtrack, if you want to work out, that is the best workout soundtrack of all
I
time.
did it for years, jumping rope,
Yeah.
literally like Rocky Balboa using that soundtrack.
But so like I'm dealing with the aftermath of this, right? And so I'm on swallow precautions, and what that means is, because the stroke affects muscles in your mouth, they don't want you to
Joking.
eat something and die, right?
Yep.
So all they would give me was like chicken broth and applesauce, and I hate applesauce. So
So good. That's our one
chicken.
difference so far.
That's our
I
difference.
love applesauce.
You love applesauce.
Can't be friends anymore.
But so they're sending all these people to check me out, and one of the people they sent me was like basically a therapist, and I said to her, I said, I'm going to be back to full strength in 2 weeks. And she said, that's not really possible. She said, I understand that you're still in shock, and that's totally. And she gave me a pamphlet. That's totally normal. And it's these feelings around loss. You're on a long road. And I wasn't gonna be an ass, right? I was gonna, but because I wasn't 23, Richard, anymore.
I'm gonna say you started softening from V1 to
Right,
V3.
that's right. Yeah. And so but I spent 8+ hours a day in this meditative state where I am seeing, like, my wife and I had been watching Maisel on Amazon, right? And she had this job as a old school telephone switchboard operator. So I visualized my brain like that, like the neuronal pathways reconnecting, new ones forming. And I would say to myself, I'm back on stage, because I was doing a lot of keynote speaking at the time. I'm better than ever. 2 weeks. And the game that I chose to refine my motor skills was Cuphead, like the most viciously brutal side-scrolling game of all ever made.
So hold on. So I know, and I think we're speaking the same thing. My sons, 8 and 6, recently in the last year or so got into the Netflix show Cuphead and Mudman.
It's the same thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that show is based on that game.
I love it.
Yeah, and it is murderously. I still haven't beaten it. I
It's that hard.
It's that hard. Like,
I want to play it.
Like I'll pick it up, I'll put it down for 6 months at a time, and I'll pick it up again. Like, it's really brutally. Supposedly some new DLC came out, which makes it easier. They nerfed some of the bosses or something. I don't know. But anyway, so but yes, so 2 weeks go by. I'm feeling good again. But like, everybody wants to know why a 46-year-old who doesn't drink, who doesn't smoke, who's never done drugs, who worked out 7 days a week, sometimes twice a day, who ate only organic foods he cooked himself, who had a meditation practice, a gratitude practice. Like, how did I have a stroke?
Yep.
And so everybody had a theory. It's probably cancer. So they sent me to the oncologist. Oh, it's probably this. You've probably got that. So I'm going here and there to every ologist you can possibly imagine. And everything's negative. And so when I have the follow-up with my neurologist, maybe a month later, after all of the testing had been concluded, he's sitting there with the results, and my wife is there with me. And so there was still a little loophole. Like, if you needed a caretaker, you could have somebody come in with you to the doctor's office.
Beautiful.
She was my caretaker, right? So she came in with me. And he says, well, all your results are negative. I'm like, yes, I'm aware of that. He said, so the only thing I could really attribute this to would be stress. He said, let me ask you a question. He goes, how many hours do you work? Let me stop you right there, Doc. He says, I don't work at all. And he said, well, you're a young guy. What, did you win the lottery? Did you inherit some money? Like, what's the deal with that? He said, no, I don't really work because I'm an entrepreneur and I love what I do.
Yeah.
And he got so pissed. And he said, Richard, how many hours a week do you love what you do?
Yeah.
I said, about 80. He said, I'm going to tell you something, and I'm putting this in the context of you've already had a close call once. He said, the odds that you came out of this spot clean, like you're functioning perfectly well, are like ridiculously low. If you keep doing what you're doing, because
Yep.
work is work, whether you love it or you hate it, you're putting a stress on your body.
Yep.
And this something like this could happen again. And the next time you might not be so lucky. And so he said, you got to reduce your hours. And my wife, puts her head in her hands. He'll never stop. He's an animal. Right. And I said to them both, I said, all right, I do solemnly swear, right? 25 hours a week for the rest of my life. And I've done it.
It's
It was
beautiful.
June 30th of 2020 was my stroke. And I worked 25 hours a week. I have a greatly improved, not that my marriage was bad, it wasn't. But it's better than it was because I'm
Yes.
more attentive. I take more time, even more time. I mean, I did my morning routine and all that, but now, like, I actually, we've talked about this. Like, I build me time into my day. Like, I build the Netflix movies and the sci-fi and the horror and the video games that my wife doesn't care about. I build it. I build time for that into my schedule as a reward based on goals I set for myself
Yep.
every single day. And what that enables me to do is to be more present
Yes.
as a dad and as a husband. I'm, I used to say the car accident was the best thing that ever happened to me. The stroke certainly was equally significant because it shifted my life. And now I am inspired and I have an entirely new platform where I help entrepreneurs bring balance to their lives because actually, what's really interesting is I've created a system of tools that has allowed me to be more efficient in 25 hours a week than I was at 80.
You're entering
And
Tim Ferriss territory, 4-hour work week.
I've always loved Tim Ferriss. I've read Tools of Titans. I've read 4 Hour Work
He's
Week.
amazing.
He is, and I have a great deal of respect for him. So, but I think, and he would not acknowledge, he has acknowledged this. The concept of a 4 hour work week isn't something that most people can wrap their minds around.
Nope.
And you have to be able to buy in subconsciously or
That's
whatever
the trick for
right.
every single thing that you ever do.
You have
is
to be
belief.
able to buy in. Right.
Is belief.
Right. And
you can change the world with your mind, but you have to believe it.
But it's quite interesting, like this journey, and I tell people this, that it's been the journey that I am so remarkably grateful for.
No question.
Because now I'm helping people in very different ways, and my life is totally fulfilled. My life is balanced, and the next chapter is even more exciting. But I am just incredibly grateful.
Beautiful share, brother. And the first thing I want to say is I'm glad you're here.
Me too.
Glad you're alive. I'm sure a lot of people are. I'm sure sometimes people tongue in cheek, be like, oh, pain in the ass, but I'm glad he's here. Because I can say the same thing about me in terms of, that. So, but I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that you're with us and just share the story. Glad that what you're displaying, in a sense, even though it's your story and even though you've become accustomed to sharing it, there's parts that are tougher than others. And it takes a little courage to share that, especially amongst people outside of yourself or your circle. So coming onto a podcast and sharing this, and vulnerability is courage in action. So I just want to say thank you.
I appreciate that, Jesse. I think, I've always felt that when something happens to you, you have two choices, right? You can ball your fist and get mad at the sky and blame whatever, deity you believe in. Or you could say, what are the lessons? How can I change? What can be better? I think since everything's happened for me, and I'm specifically referring to a global platform, is I have an additional piece that I feel like it's important for me. I feel compelled to speak about things and be vulnerable, because if I help one person
it's all that
make
matters.
change, then it's worth it. So I appreciate that, but I feel very much called to share.
And thank you for sharing. And think about changing yourself, changing your mind, changing your habits, changing your lifestyle, and how that affects others that are directly impacted by you on the daily. The family, your business partners, your friends, your colleagues, your contacts, me, like people that you talk to and share that story with. It absolutely does make a difference. And I want to tie it back to a shared experience with Meridian points that we have in different ways. And so Acupuncture, for those that are listening and watching, taps into energy centers located through the body called meridian points. And these meridian points are basically places for stored energy. And what you were just talking about, from stress to emotions to physical to mental, emotional systems, whatever we do, whether we deem it positive, negative, anything in between, will get stored in the body. And if you store, there's a book on this. The body keeps the score. And the more things you store in your body, the less margin you have for new things. And if you go 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years without releasing energy, emotion, feeling, expression, which most people don't, because we're taught to bottle things up, especially men growing up of our age. The paradigm's shifting a little bit, but the men that our 40s and above, we're always told, don't be a pussy. We don't show emotions. Suck it up. Some people had a different upbringing, but for the most part, especially in the military, where I served, it's very much that. That's the status quo. Toughen up. What happens when you toughen up is you bottle up. And eventually, when you have enough pressure inside of that bottle, it explodes. And that can be in the form of disease. That could be in the form of blowing up on a person that you love, and verbally, emotionally, physically. And so these meridian points that store energy, whether it's acupuncture or something that I'll share, it's a technique called EFT tapping. Are you familiar with this?
I am, actually.
So for EFT tapping, you can start at the crown of your head. You can start over your eyebrow, come to your eyebrow, below your eye, under your nose. You can come to your collarbone, and then you can come under where you're near your heart, on your ribs. And in this one experience that I had with EFT tapping that I'm referring to, probably 2 years ago, I was working with a therapist, and this person had me unlock some childhood trauma I didn't even know I was holding on to. And this childhood trauma was in the form of the feeling of abandonment and betrayal. And I had the most cathartic release dealing with these meridian points, acupuncture, EFT tapping, however you get there. And for people listening to this, it can absolutely save your life. And it can deload, and you can operate lighter, and you can show up in the world better. So I think that what you said, from this Western medicine school of thought to the Eastern medicine school of thought, which in my purview, in my experience, both are powerful. Both have different techniques. I do lean a lot more to the Eastern and a lot more to the natural, plant medicines like we talk about. But combined together, you brought forth your own healing modality. You brought forth life, and you were able to take a look at these things and say, you know what? I'm not done yet. Version 4, version 5, whatever the versions are that are coming, there's a reason why you decided to be here. I just, again, want to tie all that together and say thank you for being here, brother.
Well, I love that. And, I think you said something really interesting too. One of the things that we know with psychotherapy is that it doesn't really matter. Like, there's a million different kinds. There's cognitive behavior therapy, and there's solution focus, and there's psychodynamic, and there's all these dark. Everybody's got a different kind of, I'm inventing the next great psychotherapy, right? What the research shows is that it doesn't matter. They all work.
Yep.
What makes the difference between successful therapy or not is the clinician's ability to connect with the patient in a meaningful way.
Yep.
So as you described, the EFT tapping, and we talked about acupuncture, and there's all these different things.
So many.
It's about what resonates with you, right? What works for you, because there's a lot of different ways to achieve the same results.
I agree. And we didn't even, one of my favorite things to talk about is psychotherapy, psychoanalysis. I've been a student of Carl Jung for many years. And that's a whole nother topic for another conversation. We're just scratching the surface on things I want to talk about. So, in the interest of time for both of us, I would love
you want to do a second.
I would love to have you back, and I would love to have you talk more in detail some of the things, because there's a lot in that list that you just went through that I'm still checking off in my mind. We need to talk about, plus other things we haven't even tapped on yet. Yeah. So definitely have the invite for round 2, 3, 4, how many ever it takes. And then, is there anything that you're working on today? I'd be remiss to ask you, that you want to plug, chat about, anything that there's something that you're looking forward to, that we can leave for the fans.
I'm going to tease it for our next talk.
Beautiful.
Because my developers are hard at work on it right now. But I am developing an app that allows parents, families to capture and preserve the digital essence, the soul of who they are, in perpetuity in ways that have never been done before. And we're
Uh,
bringing this to market
let's talk about that next time.
later in Q4. So yeah,
that sounds wildly unbelievable. And I have a couple things for you that I'll talk about with you offline. Some people I want to connect you with. I think that'd be great. So thank you so much as the first listener, the first viewer to hear today's version of your origin story and your journey. I really do appreciate you. I appreciate you in my life as someone who's becoming a friend, to contact someone who's, inspiring and leading a change in the world. And so thank you so much, brother.
I feel the same way and so grateful to spend another hour with you today. It's been awesome.
You're the man, dude. He's Dr. Richard. I'm Jesse T. Catch us on next week's episode of The Jesse T Show.